What's good, guys? Now, for the past 6 months, I've been working with FlutterFlow. I build simple apps, I build more complex apps, and now I'm actually diving deeper and deeper in FlutterFlow in order to really understand how it works at a very low level in order to build all kinds of complex and sophisticated apps. Now, before that, I dabbled a little bit with AppGyver, and so I made a couple of videos. I talked about some simple concepts. I talked about a little more complex concepts. And in this video, after 6 months, I want to go back to AppGyver and I want to see how it feels to use it after having worked with FlutterFlow for a relatively long amount of time. And so the purpose of this video is to share with you some thoughts as to how AppGyver compares with FlutterFlow after having used both of these tools for a good amount of time. And so we're gonna go out and we're gonna build a simple app. And in the process, I'm gonna show you and tell you a lot of things that work differently in FlutterFlow and also tell you which side I like better and why. And at the end of the video, I'm gonna give you my final thoughts and I'm also gonna tell you which tool I prefer for what purpose. All right, so here we are in AppGyver. Let's go ahead and log in and create an app. So I have a couple of apps here. I'm using the free plan, and I believe AppGyver has like only a free plan. I believe there's some enterprise plan, but mostly it's free plan. So it's not like you can do this, you can do that. So it's chances are, unless you have a very successful app, you won't need to pay anything. So we're gonna come here, we're gonna say create a new app. We're gonna call this app sample app. We're gonna say create. All right, and here we are in the UI. Okay, so we have our widgets. We have widgets that I may have created, composite components installed. These components, basically combinations of widgets. Kind of like in FlutterFlow, you have components as well. And we have the how it views, the preview device width. And one thing to know right off the bat is AppGyver is very much mobile first. So this is very similar to FlutterFlow. It's different than Bubble, which shows you like a desktop size web page for building web apps. FlutterFlow and AppGyver are similar in that extent. On the right hand side, we have properties and we have a tree layout, which is kind of that widget tree in FlutterFlow. Now, before we start building the app, let's go inside this data area here. And I want to talk a little bit about the data because data here works very differently than FlutterFlow. So we have data resources and we're going to come back to it in a second, but we have connectors. So we have a Google Firebase connector. You can enable it and you're going to fill it out and you will have access to your Google Firebase. And so this is very similar to FlutterFlow because chances are if you're building a FlutterFlow app, you're going to be using a Google Firebase or an API, but mostly it's probably going to be Google Firebase, which is a nice backend. If you go into data resources, this is where you add your resources. So we have on-device storage. We have REST API, we have OData integration, we have Google Firebase, and we have Marketplace Search. Now, before I create any of these storage types, let's go ahead and look at Marketplace Search and what exactly that means. So this is basically a predefined REST API. So we have REST countries and exchange rates. So basically, this is like REST API. It's just a built-in REST API with kind of predefined for you, right? You have two predefined REST APIs. So if we exit, so basically Marketplace Search is kind of similar to REST API, okay? So let's go ahead and start out with on-device storage and take a look what it does. We need a resource ID. I'm just gonna call it data. I know that's very unique. And we have a description and now we have the schema. So what can we create? We can create an object or an icon. Okay, so we're gonna go for the object. And inside this object, we can create different data types. Okay, so there's a data type ID, but we need a new data type. So let's say we're building like a to-do app. Okay, very simple app. So we're gonna have name, and name is going to be a text, correct? and we're going to have done, which is Boolean, true or false. Scroll down, and I'm going to say true or false. Now, what is this on-device storage? Well, this is very similar to FlutterFlow's local storage or local store, except for one major difference. The difference here is that we have an object, and later on we can define it either as we can access it and work with it, in other words, either as a list or as a single object. In FlutterFlow, you cannot have an object when we are doing local storage. We can only have simple fields. We can create a list out of those simple fields, but we can't encapsulate them in an object. And objects are very, very powerful. So this is a big plus for AppGyver, because an object you can encapsulate all kinds of different data, and you can do interesting things. You can link them to a list like what we're going to do right now. So we're going to say save data resource, and now we have this data thing. And now we can go to the UI canvas, and we can start building our app. So let's say we're building a super simple app. We're going to have a list of items, and we're going to have another input that's going to input new values, okay? So let's go for our list, and let's say the list is going to be a toggle list, okay? So you have these lists here. I'm going to drag and drop this toggle list. We also have some primitives there, so we can create our own primitive, our own composite item. But we're going to keep it simple. We're going to create a built-in list. Now, one thing to note here is that unlike FlutterFlow, you do not need to create a list and then add children to that list. Okay, here you just add this one widget or this component in FlutterFlow talk, and also in AppGyver talk, I believe, they call it composite component, which is a component in FlutterFlow. And now you can leverage this. You can use it as a field, or you can leverage it as a list. And the way you do it is you say repeat with. Okay? Now, we can't do repeat with anything just yet, and that is because we haven't done one important step. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to show you the key to AppGyver happiness. And so if you go to variables, right, this view variables, you're going to be on the screen that has a bunch of different variables. So we have app variables, page parameters, data variables. In AppGyver, in order to access the data, you need a variable to kind of act as a broker. Okay, so this is very different from FlutterFlow, because in FlutterFlow, you don't need that automatically, right? You don't need to create these variables in order to access the data, right? And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is if I create a list, I can access the data already, right? I can access the data, and really AppGyver knows about the data we have because we already have the schema, but still it wants a variable in order to do it. So I'm going to go back to variables, and I'm going to create a data variable because it's accessing the data. Okay, so I'm going to add a data variable, data. Okay, and I need to specify, is this going to be a collection? Is this going to be a single, or is this going to be new data record? This is important because this specifies how I work with the data that I have in local stores. Is it going to be a list? Is it going to be single, or is it going to be new data record? Well, it's going to be a list in this case. I'm going to say list. I'm going to go back to view, and now we can populate this, okay? So I click on this, I go to repeat with, I go to data and variables, I go to the data variable, and I pick my data variable, okay? And it even previews it for me. It says, well, this is a list object with 3 properties, right? ID, name, and done. So I hit save. And now it does the same thing that FlutterFlow does. It kind of grays it out, it blurs it out a little bit just to show you this is a list. Okay, so this is very different than FlutterFlow. FlutterFlow does not have all these variables all over the place. You just access the data. And to be honest with you, as you will see in just a second, these variables are kind of a blessing and a curse. So I'm going to hit save. Okay, so now this is loaded up with the list, but we have internal values, right? We have variables inside, basically items inside, because this is a composite, right? So if I double click on it, you see it's a composite. I have a toggle and I have a label, and I can create these composite widgets, these elements, like you can do with FlutterFlow, by basically picking the whole thing in the tree and then right-clicking and saying convert it to a component. But the way AppGyver works is that these composite elements are all over the place, and this really replaces FlutterFlow having child widgets, right? So with FlutterFlow, you would have a list and a bunch of child widgets. To be honest with you, I prefer FlutterFlow's approach. I want to see child widgets because this is a list, but I want the children to be repeated, and I want to see them here, unlike double clicking and then seeing them here. Okay, so this is a design and philosophy choice, and I definitely prefer FlutterFlow. Philosophy, their angle of showing this children here, instead of having everything a composite component, right? Anything that you're going to be using, if you're building any kind of sophisticated app, you're going to have composite components. So anyway, we click here and we have all of these fields inside. So now we can fill them in with variables. So I'm going to say this content is going to be data item in repeat, right? This is kind of like getting access to our root value. Like in FlutterFlow, this would be a child widget, and it would have access to the list, which list is gonna load the data. So I'm gonna go to data item and repeat. I'm gonna pick my name. I'm gonna hit save. And this toggle here, I want it to be done, right? So I'm gonna go here, and it says done, and it's nice because it tells you what's compatible or not. FlutterFlow does that as well. It makes them red on the screen, like when you're pulling in variables, some are not compatible, and so they become red. Okay, so I'm gonna have done, and so now we have a simple app that loads the data. We don't have any data, and so what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a little input, a text input, in order to get data entered here. So I'm gonna go in here, and I want an input. So where's my input? My input is input field, okay? And before I continue, I just want to show you that you also have the same, you have similar stuff. You have a container, you have a row, you have a scroll view. So if I go to a row, I have two rows, and I can go back to my layout, and I can specify, do I want 3 cells? Do I want 2 cells? Do I want just 1 cell? And I can align this row. So for instance, I can say, well, let's go to the input field right here. And this input field is now you're seeing the hierarchy, right? So I can go back to my row, and I can say, well, I want 2 cells, and now I have another cell. I can want 3 cells. So this is very similar to FlutterFlow. In fact, it's almost the same in a way. With FlutterFlow, you have a container, row, and you also have columns, right? By default, everything is a column, and row is automatic, right? You start out with a column, like all of this is a column, and then you add rows as you go. And to be honest with you, I do prefer FlutterFlow's approach here as well, because I want that control, what's a column, what's a row. I don't want to have implicit stuff, but I do understand that some people might find this simpler, because by default, you're basically adding elements to a column. Like by default, all of this is one big column. That's kind of the way to think about. All right, so you can center it, you can scroll down, we have a layout, you have width and height. So you have some control, FlutterFlow gives you more control in my opinion, but you have decent control. So I'm gonna say no, and now we don't have any cells here. We just have a row with 1 cell, and that has the input field, all right? Now let's go ahead and add a button. Let's add a button here. And what this button is gonna do is it's going to add a new item to the list, and we're going to display this list. So let's go ahead and save it, and let's go ahead and preview this app. So how do you do that? You open the app preview portal here, and then you choose the app that you want to preview. So this is our latest app. We're going to open it up, and this is what the app looks like. Now, what's nice about AppGyver is that, check this out. We're going to go back to our app, and I have this headline. Let's say I want to delete this. I delete it, I go back to the app, and it's deleted automatically. So basically, you're viewing at a JavaScript app that automatically updates in real time, right? So if I come in here, I go to headline, and I wanted to update it headline 3, I save, I come back here, headline 3. This is awesome, because in FlutterFlow, it's a little bit more complicated. You can run the app, you can create a test environment, and the problem with that is, what you want to do typically is create a test environment. That way you can refresh it fairly quickly, but it's not going to be instant. It's going to be, they say, up to 10 seconds. But the problem with FlutterFlow right now is that the test environment is very, very buggy. It works like 70% of the time, roughly speaking. A lot of times it basically it doesn't work, it doesn't load, it gives you an error message, and a lot of times you have to stop it, start it, or just run the app. But when you run the app, it takes 2 to 4 minutes to load the app, so it's a pain. Whereas here it's automatic, right? Headline 4, save, boom, updated. That's awesome. It's similar to Bubble in that respect, but I believe it's even faster than Bubble. So big advantage for AppGyver. All right, let's change it back, save it, and let's go ahead and create a function feature where it basically adds a new item here. All right, so how do we do that? Well, if you click on button, you can pull up this logic pane here, and you can create, you can update the component. Well, or create a new one. So we're going to create a new one, drag it here. We're going to drag this line. And now if you create this, create the record, you can specify your data, which is automatic, right? So like we pick this data, we only have one, okay? And it knows what it is. It's tied, it's bound. It's bound to the object, and it's a list. And that way we can create new records because it's not a single. We're accessing it as a list. It's basically a list of objects. Now, how do we add the new one? Well, somebody's going to type something here and we want to add. So we're coming here. We're going to create an object with properties. And this is going to be our object. So we're going to say done is false because it's not done yet. And now we need name. So ideally, what we want to do is we want to bind this to our input field, right? And the way we do it is, well, ideally, you want to go to component properties. And you want to say another component's property or output value, right? We're going to come here and we see all the components. And here's our input field. We pick it. And guess what? You can't bind it to value. Why? Because it says the type text number is not assignable to the type text. This is text number, basically that. And our data type is text. And it's crazy. I mean, ideally, that's what you want to do. You want to bind it to this text. Right? And you can't do that. So what you got to do is you need to go into our variables pane, right? Always save it. It's a good habit to save. And what we need to do is we need to create a new variable. You can create an app variable or a page variable. Okay? Well, in this case, it's a page variable because it has to do with stuff on that specific page. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable. We're going to say new to-do item, something like this. And now there's a variable. Now guess what? I can go back here. I can go back here. I could go back here, and now I can use it. But before I can do that, I need to bind it, right? I'm going to go in here. I'm going to say value is now bound to that variable. I can go to page variable. Now it's bound to that variable. Okay? And now I can go to button, and I can say, well, create record, custom object. We're going to bind it to that variable. We're going to say data, page variable, new item. So as you can see, you create a new variable and you bind it here, and then this button is connected to that variable. Now, this is a big design thing for AppGyver. Everything is around variables, and I can see why they did it, but still it's painful because ideally you shouldn't really bind this to another variable because this is an input field. Right? We're going to enter data here. Okay, so it doesn't make much sense in order to, have another variable, all of these extra steps, because this is an input field. All I have to do is basically name it something, right? I can just name it whatever I want, and I should be able to access it, right? I can go up to advanced properties and I can say, well, this is my input to-do item, and I should be able, access it. But this is only a display name. This is not a workable, this is not a working variable that everything else understands. Okay, so this is something that I prefer in FlutterFlow, because in FlutterFlow this field would be automatically part of widget state, meaning that if you're doing any kind of actions, which is really what this is, any kind of an action editor or a simple action, you're going to have access to widget state, and you're automatically going to have all access to all the widgets that have an input. Okay, automatically. Okay. So that's something I like about FlutterFlow. Now, having said that, I want to make another point, is that in FlutterFlow, you will not be able to have access to elements that are kind of read-only, like with this element. You don't have access in widget state. Right now in widget state, it only shows you input stuff, right? So like this field, you will have access to it. And so this is one area where FlutterFlow has a definite advantage, is that it gives you access to these fields directly. They're part of widget state. If they take input, they're part of widget state. That means you can access them directly. So that's a nice thing about FlutterFlow. But with AppGyver, everything runs through variables. So that's also not a bad thing, because that way you can keep track. You can come to variables and you can say, well, those are my app variables, those are my page variables, I have my parameters, I have my data variables. So it's a different philosophy. All right, so let's go to our app and let's create a new item. We already have one item we created. Let's say item 3. We come in here, it reloads automatically, and we're gonna have a new item. There's our new item, okay? Beautiful, right? Everything is great. Everything works perfectly. Now, let's create another little function to show you how it redirects to the second page. Just to have an example of a multi-page app here. So if we click on the empty page, we have a preview, which is the same thing in FlutterFlow. Add a new page, and let's call it page 2. Okay, and what this page is going to do, it's going to be accepting parameters and it's going to display them. Okay, so we're going to say page parameters, add a parameter. I'm just going to call it bar1, and it's going to be text, save. And I like this also because this is very similar to FlutterFlow in a way that you define the parameters on the page, and that way you know what parameters a specific page is expecting. So now we can go back to our first page, come back here, go to view, and we can have a flow, right? So for instance, let's say we click on this. I want to display the item that we click on the second page, okay? And so I'm going to come in here, component tap, and I'm going to do a navigation. Okay, I'm going to say, where's our navigation? Navigate, open page. And I'm going to do this, and I'm going to say open page. And what is our page going to be? Page 2, and it expects a parameter. Okay, so what's the parameter? We click on this, a data item in repeat, and we're gonna pick name. That is what we know. So we're gonna be passing the name value of the item that we clicked to the second page. Hit save, go to the second page, and let's display it. So I'm gonna go to title. Oh, where do you have title? Okay, let's delete that there, and let's go ahead and load it from the parameter. Content. It's going to be a data variable, and it's going to be a page parameter. Okay, save. Go back to AppGyver. All right, so now if you reload it, and if we click on it, it displays the value. Okay, it's automatic, right? It's basically a JavaScript app. Okay. Now I also want to show you a couple of advanced features, right? You can do an alert. So like for instance, let's say we do this, and we want to alert, right? And what's going to happen here is that, as you can see, this create record, it has 2 outputs. So one is going to be a success, and one is going to be an error, right? So let's say we're successful. We want to display an alert. So we come in here, and what is the title going to be? Well, output of another node. This is going to be create record because we have a response. And let's say we created name. We hit save. And now if we come back here, we refresh, and I say, well, item 4. It says item 4. This is our sample kind of dialog box, and it refreshes it here. All right. So a little bit something extra. You can do a confirm. You can do a spinner. You can do all that, all of these kind of device functionality. And we also have JavaScript. So you can delete that. You can drag a JavaScript here, and now you can do something like this. You can double click. And what you have here is your custom function, right? You have the input, which is basically, the input that we're getting. So what is the input? Output of another node. Which node? Create record. Let's say name. And now we have input. And now what do we want to do, right? Do we want to have an output? What exactly do we want to do here? So we're going to be returning an object, and this is going to be the result, right? What we have. And here is the code, right? So if you look at this code, this is our inputs. This is input 1, and this is to uppercase. Basically, we're returning another object with a result, and the value is going to be the uppercase of whatever value we passed, right? So if we created a value, if you created new item, it's going to be all uppercase. So you can do an update, and then you can show let's show an alert. And so what we can do is we can do something like this, and we can basically delete this. This is successful. It passes it here, and then it passes the uppercase, all of the uppercase there. So let's come in here, create record. This is fine. Let's tie these variables. Double click. This is the response. This is set. So we're basically passing in the name. The name comes here as input 1. It returns to uppercase, and and the result is going to be an object with the result, which is a text value. So if we update, we come back here, and now we need a title. And so we're going to say output of another node. We have 3 nodes. Because we have 3 nodes, I'm going to say function result, and that's kind of what we have. All right, now we save it. We come back here, refresh it, and create a new one. And there we go. Now it's all uppercase. So that's a quick way of doing a custom function. Very similar, except in this case, you're writing a JavaScript code. And you can do pretty much anything that a JavaScript can do. You have access to everything over here. So that's really, really nice. It's very, very helpful. So there's your custom function. Basically very, very similar functionality there. You also have your if conditions, you have your delay logic, you have receive event, trigger event. So you can do all that very, very similar to FlutterFlow. So this tool is a lot more similar to FlutterFlow than, for instance, like Bubble, which is kind of different. Lots of things that you can do here that you can do in FlutterFlow. And so my final thoughts here is that this is a great tool. It's mobile first. You can display anything that you want. You can, create, add, edit items. You can create multiple pages. You have even a marketplace of different widgets. Look at this, flow functions. You have all these flow functions that you can use, basically custom functions that have been, somebody did them already. You have a conditioner, you have lists. So you can do pretty much anything that you want, when it comes to the UI, when it comes to the app that you want to do. But FlutterFlow is just more, I would say it's kind of more organized. It's a little bit more, it's tightly bound. First of all, I like Flutter better than, whatever AppGyver has here. I mean, not taking anything away from AppGyver. They created a nice kind of engine. But I really like Flutter's engine. I like the way Flutter organizes things. I like the columns. I like the rows. I like how you can, take a row and you can, have these closer. So if it has like 2 items, I can have them closer. I can have them a little bit more apart. I can have them more apart. I like the organization. Basically, I like Flutter. Basically, what FlutterFlow is built on top of. I like it better than what the AppGyver's engine here. So I definitely prefer Flutter to whatever they have it here. I also like the whole navigational aspect better in FlutterFlow because I don't want to access it as a composite component. I want to access it as basically as a list and then have items as children. Okay, I don't want to have a composite component everywhere. I understand it simplifies everything, but I do prefer FlutterFlow's kind of logic to that and Flutter's logic to that. Another thing I like about FlutterFlow better is I like that everything is a widget. I can create a custom widget. It's going to have its own events. It's going to have access to framework. And basically I can customize any part of an app in a very kind of programmatic friendly way. And that is the approach I like. Even though you can also create your composite components here, but you're going to be a bit more limited here as compared to FlutterFlow. And FlutterFlow has access to Flutter's vast library of different components, different things. And that's, undoubtedly bigger than AppGyver's. And so there's a lot more, widgets, a lot more things that you can use over there on Flutter's side as compared to AppGyver here. And so having said that, you can still build an amazing app. You have everything that you want. You have everything that you need in order to build an amazing app. But I will be sticking with FlutterFlow for now, simply because I just like the approach better. I like the fact that you have, children elements. I like the fact that you have kind of, access to fields that are writable on the screen. You don't need to go through a variable. I like that approach better. It suits my philosophy better. Nevertheless, AppGyver is still a very, very powerful tool that will enable you to build lots and lots of interesting apps. And so let me know in the comments below which app builder you prefer. Do you prefer FlutterFlow? Do you prefer AppGyver? Let me know why or why not. I would love to hear your opinion. And that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.